Today on Across the Fence, we travel 60 years back in time to a secret U.S. base built beneath Greenland's ice. And we talk with a Vermont professor who later uncovered its lost mystery.
It's the only eureka moment, spine-tingling science moment I've probably ever had in my life, and I'll probably never have another one. But, I had it, and that was awesome.
It's the height of the Cold War. The U.S. Army plans to build a secret base deep beneath Greenland's ice cap. They call it Camp Century. To make it real, scientists and soldiers would need to work together, carving tunnels, braving the cold, pushing the boundaries of human survival. The military would train for an atomic war in the Arctic, and scientists, driven by curiosity, could drill a mile-deep ice core, peeling back Earth's history layer by layer. What would they learn? The base has long since been abandoned, but what happened there still echoes today. Camp Century's story isn't just about the Cold War. It's about how we confront the defining challenge of our own time. I met with Paul Bierman to discuss his book, When the Ice is Gone. The book explores how Camp Century's ice cores reveal how close we are to a climate tipping point, and offers a historical blueprint for tackling existential threats.
My friends tease me sometimes that I'm a closet historian and a geologist, but I think it goes hand in hand. Geoscientists study the history of the Earth and the process of the Earth, and so I don't see it as a big extension to study modern sort of American history like this and the processes that led to what happened in places like Camp Century.
Tell me the origin story. How does the energy come together to take on an endeavor like Camp Century?
Oh, the energy started decades before that. And you might say it started with the Germans who lived on the summit of the ice sheet for a winter for 7 months inside snow tunnels that they'd built. That was the first thoughts that people had you could live inside the ice. Or you might go to World War II when American airplanes were crashing on the surface of Greenland and airmen spent 3 or 4 months living under the wings of airplanes with tarps and airdrops to keep them alive. Or more likely you move into the beginning of the Cold War when America and Canada realized that we were vulnerable from the north and that land troops could come over the north and attack North America from the Soviet Union. And all of that led to a militarization of the Arctic after World War II, where the US built the giant airbase at Thule, 10,000 men, a runway big enough for the largest bombers, eventually nuclear weapons. And that led them to the ice, realizing that they needed to understand how they could move across the ice, how they could strategically handle the ice and the snow.
As the military pushed deeper into the Arctic, they noticed something unsettling. Year after year, the glaciers were retreating.
They were alarmed. Because if Earth's climate warms, it means that the things you think you know about the Arctic strategically might not be true anymore. So in 1950, they founded an entire research branch to study snow, ice, and permafrost. And that research branch was tasked with understanding, is the climate changing? And if the climate changes, what are the effects on the military? Mostly in terms of what they refer to as trafficability.
Among those stationed in Greenland was a young mechanical engineer named Herbert Ueda. Decades later, he recalled the clear evidence that something was changing.
When I got there, you could look out your window and there's the ice cap right there. It was starting to recede then. The last time I saw the ice cap, about 10 or 15 years later, that ice cap had receded, probably a mile or so, or better. It was pretty dramatic. I mean, you've heard it's warming up, and things warming up. It was very evident there at that point.
What Ueda witnessed was more than an engineer's observation. It was an early warning that the ice was not as eternal as it seemed.
The military put a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of engineers into understanding the fundamental behaviors of snow and ice. And that allowed them to build things like Camp Century.
How are they finding the money? You know what I mean? Like, what's happening politically? Was there a lot of dissent for the project, or was there broad consensus that this was part of strategic objectives for the United States?
Cold War strategic objectives. I have read nothing about dissent at the time, but only sort of glorification of this project as American strength and a demonstration of American strength. Eventually tied, I think, very much to the project to go to the moon. Another wacky side of Camp Century that is big on the web and short on facts is this idea of something called Project Iceworm, which is real. And the idea was to put missiles under the ice in tunnels. So you can think about Camp Century as a test run for that, like how we tunnel, nuclear power. They even built a 1,300-foot railroad in Camp Century. And they wanted to put hundreds of missiles with nuclear warheads in an area about the size of the state of Alabama in northern Greenland. And the idea was if the Soviet Union chose to attack us, those missiles could pop up at launch stations, and it was a way faster trip to Moscow than from the continental US.
Camp Century may have begun as a military project, bold, secretive, and driven by Cold War urgency. But its lasting legacy came from the science, the discovery, the leadership, and the ingenuity needed to do what had never been done.
These men came in blind, except the person leading them, a guy named Henri Bader, had studied as a geologist in Switzerland, and he had studied crystals. And you say, how do you tie crystals to ice? But ice is nothing more than frozen water crystals. He was the one that the Army hired after World War II in 1947 to lead this endeavor of understanding snow and ice. And so he came with a very strong background in fundamental sciences, which he used for this applied science of understanding snow and ice. And he was the visionary, the guidance for about 20 years of the US understanding cold places, cold regions, frozen places. And he had a vision for drilling an ice core because he knew that would give them the time function for climate. They could go back, the ice was layered. That would tell them what the climate had been in the past. He invented it as he went along. All the techniques in some of his early papers are techniques we as climate scientists use now. He didn't know if they would work. He proposed them. And over the last 60 years, people have developed those techniques. So it's fascinating to read his work and realize that this guy was visionary, even if he didn't have the tools.
Bader wasn't just a scientist. He was a translator, someone who could take pure scientific curiosity and sell it to military planners whose priorities were very different.
Bader, as a scientist, is just fascinated by curiosity. And the thing that amazes me about him is as a scientist who's curious, he managed to get the Army to support this research that was only tangentially aligned to what the Army needed to know. If I had a time machine, I would want to go back and sit on the meetings between him and the upper brass. And how did he convince these people to spend this money on basic science? But he did.
In 1959, with motives mixed and money flowing, the expedition to build Camp Century was underway.
Finally, like a wagon train in the Old West, the first heavy swing got underway.
What happened next wasn't just engineering. It was a demonstration of what people can do when ambition, urgency, and ingenuity unite.
Today we would go out with all this geophysical equipment and radar, and you'd spend years trying to figure out exactly where to drill. They spent a summer, and not even a summer, they probably spent 2 weeks going, hey, it's flat here, okay, cool.
We needed a flat surface, a level with less than 1 degree of slope. This would minimize construction problems by enabling us to keep all of our tunnels on the same level. We finally picked this plateau, a smooth white plain of ice for as far as you could see.
Turns out, scientifically, they picked exactly the right place without knowing it. If you want to drill an ice core, the snow starts at the top at the center of the ice sheet, what we call the ice divide, and then it goes down and outward. By picking the flat place, they picked the ice divide, where the ice was flowing away from it in all dimensions. That meant that they got the layers with a lot less deformation than if you're off on the edge where the stuff is flowing sideways. So completely because they wanted a flat place to build the camp, they found the right place to drill the core.
With the location selected, construction began.
This snow milling machine, the Peter Plow, was our pride and joy.
Some of the trenches were 1,000 feet long. Camp Century was designed to hold 200 men. It had its own nuclear reactor for power and for hot water, and it had a place for science. It had various science research trenches, and it had a drill rig, the first of its kind, that was designed to penetrate the Greenland ice sheet. That had never been done.
Within the next few weeks, the final touches were put to Camp Century. Today, powered by its nuclear reactor, this unique installation is a completely modern community deep under the ice.
Back home, the public was fascinated. Camp Century captured the popular imagination, part science experiment, part Cold War wonder. Articles in Popular Mechanics and Boy's Life even chronicled the adventures of two Boy Scouts, one from Denmark, one from Kansas, who won a competition to spend 5 months at Camp Century.
These two Boy Scouts, one from Denmark, the other from Neodesha, Kansas, would be crawling east across 150 miles of frozen whiteness in a slow-moving convoy of polecat tractors. Their destination, their headquarters for the next 6 months of constant winter night, would be Camp Century. Soren and Kent, selected from the pick of Boy Scouting in both countries, earned their keep as junior scientific aides in one of the world's most unusual communities.
For television audiences, it was pure Americana. Kent Goring even appeared on the national television show To Tell the Truth, questioned by none other than Johnny Carson and Betty White.
Number 3, how far under the actual top of the ice are you housed?
Approximately 30 feet.
For the time that you were there, did you have very much daylight?
There was about 3 months of total darkness.
And
the rest of the time it was partly light.
So will the Rio, Kent Goring, please stand up.
But for those stationed at Camp Century, the novelty wore off quickly.
So here these kids, they must have been 17 years old or something like that, 16, 17 years old. And the joke up there was, among all the guys, was if Camp Century was first prize, would have run her up yet. Purgatory.
For those living at Camp Century, the battle against the environment was an ever-present challenge.
The biggest work they faced was the ice sheet was caving in around them. So when you cut a trench like that, 30, 40 feet deep, 20, 30 feet wide, the snow and ice will deform, and over time they will creep inward. And so they faced a problem of about a foot a year of creeping on the walls and the ceilings. So they would go with electric chainsaws, and they would cut the snow and ice away. And ice responds, if it's warmer, it creeps more and deforms more, and if it's colder, it deforms less. So around the nuclear reactor and around the dining facility and the cooking facilities, it was creeping in really quickly.
Meanwhile, beneath the daily routines of life under the ice, a quieter mission pressed on. Year after year, the scientific team returned to Camp Century, perfecting their drills, chasing the dream to reach the very bottom of the Greenland ice sheet.
We went back in 1961 and we started drilling again, and we got down about 500 feet and we got the drill stuck. So we decided we'd go back the following year and try to retrieve it. So we built a retrieving tool, and we couldn't come close to retrieving it. The following year, we left the part of the drill down the hole, the heated head. And so that ended that season. So it was just one continuous problem after another.
And this went on from 1960 until 1965, when they finally gave up on the electro drill and they went back to a mechanical device. Once they got that working, they finished the core in the next year very quickly. So the obstacles were developing a technology where it didn't exist. The National Science Foundation gave them $600,000 in 1960 to help develop this drill. That's the equivalent of millions today. The Army provided them the logistics, right? The Army provided them a base 138 miles from the edge of the Greenland ice sheet that was heated, mess hall, 4 meals a day, a drill trench where you could work without any wind because it was underneath the surface. It's the ultimate, no other ice core since then has had the level of support this one did in terms of having a place to work, which is hugely meaningful because up in the Arctic, mostly you're drilling ice cores now only in a short summer season. But there, conceivably, although they didn't, they could have drilled all year because it was the same environment under the ice.
Finally, in 1966, on July the 4th, we finished the job, 4,550 feet. Probably the most satisfying moment of my career. It just, it was a great experience.
No more ice cores would be drilled at Camp Century. As military support for Project Iceworm collapsed, so too did the base.
Kennedy said no to it. They proposed it to NATO. NATO said no, and it just died a quiet death. But the Project Iceworm being over in a sense, I think probably cut the mandate to have Century there. The ice core drilling was finishing up, the walls were collapsing, and the Vietnam War was ramping up. And it's over. The snow has kept accumulating, and that weight of that snow has just crushed everything below.
At the time, was there a plan for any of the sediment, or was the focus on getting the ice?
They focused on the ice, and there were dozens and dozens of scientific papers written on the ice, and they completely changed how we think about Earth's climate and its change over time. So they gave us the first 100,000-year continuous record of Earth's climate, and that took us from the warm period we're in now that we call the Holocene, back to what we call the last glacial maximum, when ice 2 miles thick covered Vermont and stretched down to New Jersey and Long Island, to the last time it was just warm like this, which was about 125,000 years ago. So that ice fascinated the community, but only 3 people looked at the material below. And their publications were in places that didn't attract a lot of attention. And that core was just forgotten.
When did you first hear about the Camp Century sediment cores?
I first heard about Camp Century in graduate school because we all learned about Camp Century in graduate school. I did not learn about the sediment cores there in grad school. I just learned about the ice.
It was in 2008, while in Greenland with fellow UVM faculty Tom Newman, that Paul first began to connect the dots that would lead him to Camp Century and an amazing, important discovery.
Tom studied ice and ice cores, and he actually hooked me on going to Greenland. And I went with Tom, and we did a bunch of work up there trying to understand how the ice sheet worked, how it eroded rock, when it last was large, when it got small, those sorts of things. Because I run a laboratory at UVM that's our bread and butter. We date things. And we try to understand how the Earth's surface works. And so we went up there, and at that point, I was having a conversation with Tom and a fellow named Richard Alley, who's a very famous glaciologist who drilled a core in the center of Greenland, was integral to that. And we were talking about how do we get stuff from the bottom?
Paul knew that drilling ice cores to reach and study the soil below was prohibitively expensive. But he also knew that one sediment core might already be out there, the tail end of the Camp Century ice core.
They drilled through the ice, and the ice got dirtier and dirtier toward the bottom. We call that basal ice or dirty ice. More silt. Imagine, Vermont in mid-March when the snow starts to melt and those banks the plows pulled up are, half dirt, half ice. That's what the ice looked like until they hit the bottom. And then they were drilling into soil.
And they kept going. So they hit soil and they keep going. How much farther did they drill?
They went about 11.5 feet. And in Uita's oral history, he says, we would have kept on, except we broke a bearing.
The question was, what had become of it?
Everybody told me, ice is gone. It's not in the U.S. Ice Core Repository. The bottom 100 meters or so is somewhere else. Nobody knew where. People were like, it's probably in Copenhagen. Danes aren't talking, whatever. And I didn't pay it all that much attention until I was at a meeting about Greenland, I think in Buffalo in 2018, and met a woman named Dorte Dahl Jensen, who's the queen of Danish ice core science. Out of the blue in February 2019, I get an email from her saying, we're having a meeting with just a couple people, and we're going to talk about the oldest ice. Won't you come to Copenhagen?
2 months after that, standing in a Danish ice repository, he found himself face to face with the long-lost sediment core from Camp Century.
And there's a photograph of the first time I ever saw this thing. And it was April, and it was probably 65 and sunny in Copenhagen, and inside the freezer was minus 27 Celsius, and it wasn't sunny. And I was wearing Vermont clothes good for April, not for a freezer like that. I did have a wool hat and some gloves with me. And I got to hold a piece of this, and there was a box full of the core. It usually, it's in lengths like this, and it had been cut down to things you could fit in a cookie jar. And there were 20 some odd of these cookie jars, and we were picking them up and looking at them and holding the samples, 3 or 4 of us, for as long as we could go before our teeth were chattering too badly. And that's how it started.
Start slow.
We asked for 2 samples. There are 30 odd samples down this core. We asked for the top and the bottom of the soil at the base. And it took a couple months of international negotiations to get them here and to line up a team. We had about a dozen people who were going to work on those, but UVM led this. A DHL van shows up 48 hours after it was shipped. Everything was good. We opened it up. The sediment's still frozen in baggies, and we put it in a freezer here. We're in the UVM Cosmo Lab. This is where we do our analysis for dating rocks, ice cores, sediments. It's one of a few labs of its kind in the world. It's an amazing feeling. The first time we cracked open the refrigerator box that we got it in and you saw these things sitting there, yeah. So this ice core, particularly the sediment at the bottom of it, is absolutely unique. There is nothing like it in the world right now. And then there was the fateful afternoon when we had melted it and we started to put it through this stack of brass sieves, because we were saving every last grain of this.
Paul and his graduate student, Andrew Christ, set the containers of murky water aside to settle. And then, Paul noticed something completely unexpected. Tiny specks of fossilized plant material floating on the surface.
I said to Drew, because I was looking at the muddy water, and I said, Drew, there are fossils in this. And he let off this, like, oh, you're nuts. It's the middle of summer, heat stroke or something. And they were flea-sized. They're not big. They're, at most a millimeter or 2. And I said, wait a minute. And I took a little pipette, and I pipetted up the fossils, and I put them in a little white petri dish. And then I handed that dish to Drew, who was standing next to the microscope, and I said, you have a look and see what you think. And he must have stared 10, 20, 30 seconds before he let out this string of expletives. And Drew's not a person these are happy expletives. Very calm guy. And he's like, you gotta look down the scope. And there's a photograph from his cell phone pointed down the tube of the microscope. That's the first photo we have of these things that I use in every talk now. It's got a little twig in the middle, and then little bits of moss on the side, maybe a seed. And we spent that afternoon just staring down a microscope and pinching ourselves, like, this can't be real. Because I've looked at sediment from glaciers for almost 45 years now, and I've never seen a piece of wood, a fossil, or anything in that sediment. It's always just like, when I go to a gravel pit here, it's sand and gravel, right? It's the only eureka moment, spine-tingling science moment I've probably ever had in my life, and I'll probably never have another one. But, I had it, and that was awesome. When we found these fossils, we realized what a find we had, because now it implied that an ice sheet many people looked at as permanent or semi-permanent, if it hadn't vanished, had gotten much, much smaller. But we had no clue when. All we knew was that today there's almost a mile of ice. At some point there was no ice and an Arctic tundra growing there, because the plant pieces, even me as a geologist, knew that these were not big conifers, oak trees, anything like that. They were little bits that looked a lot like tundra. The first day we saw these plants, and it wasn't hard to go from plants to wait ice was gone, to wait ice was gone, sea level rise. But to quantify all that, the whens, it took us another year to learn that the ice actually was gone 400,000 years ago, which is a warm period very much like today. So we've already raised global temperatures 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's about how much warmer it was 400,000 years ago. The difference was we now have 425 ppm carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. 400,000 years ago we had 280. So half again more carbon dioxide. Nature doesn't respond quickly. So the planetary system takes a while. We've thrown all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That warming is going to continue, and the effects are going to continue. It took the last 5 years for all that to come together. And then we work with people who model the ice sheet. And so it took a little while more before we knew that the only way to expose Camp Century was to melt the equivalent of at least 5 feet of sea level rise. So when Camp Century had tundra on it, sea level was 5 feet higher, at least. It could have been 25 for all we know, but it was at least 5. If we continue down the path we have now of emitting such large quantities of greenhouse gases, Greenland's ice sheet is doomed and part of Antarctica's ice sheet is doomed. In the Greenland ice sheet sitting on land right now is the equivalent of about 7 meters, or 25 feet of sea level rise. Bring it up 25 feet, half of Boston underwater. New York City subways underwater. Something like 500 million people live in the coastal zone within 25 feet of the ocean. So if we think we have a migration problem right now, with hundreds of thousands of people moving around, imagine 500 million people needing a new place to live and farm and work. It will completely upset the world strategic order. And that's spoken as a geologist, right? That's not spoken as a political scientist, but it's pretty clear if we flood Jakarta, pick your city, right? If we flood that, it's not going to be a stable political time. So that's why we should care. And this one project told us that Greenland's ice has been vulnerable in the past. It will be vulnerable in the future.
Paul sees a warning in Camp Century's ice, but in the camp's creation, he sees a reason for hope.
When people ask me how I can study climate, how I can write a book like this, how I can wake up in the morning and keep doing things, this is exactly it. That this band of scientists and engineers were thrown a problem. How do you drill through the Greenland ice sheet? How do you build a city in an ice sheet? They hadn't ever done either, and they did it from human ingenuity. And when a student asks me, how are we gonna get out of the climate mess we've created? I throw them right back to this, of like, these people in the 60s did it. They didn't have the computers we did, the simulations, the materials, yet they accomplished the impossible. We can do exactly the same thing with decarbonizing our energy systems right now and dealing with the climate crisis if we have the will. And I think the difference is they had the will.
The will to accomplish the impossible. Can we find it again? That is the ultimate question. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.